A sausage looks almost ridiculously simple. Meat, fat, salt, seasoning, all packed inside a casing. But hidden inside that ordinary tube of food is one of humanity's oldest solutions to a deadly problem. For most of history, there were no refrigerators. Kill an animal, and the clock immediately started ticking. Fresh meat spoiled quickly, especially in warm weather. So our ancestors learned to chop the parts they could not eat immediately, mix them with salt, stuff them into a container, and preserve them with smoke, drying, or fermentation. The sausage was not originally convenience food. It was survival technology. And over thousands of years, that technology would travel from ancient kitchens to Roman festivals, medieval butcher shops, German smokehouses, American factories, and eventually supermarket shelves around the world. Exactly where the first sausage was made is impossible to know. The basic idea is probably older than the written recipes describing it. Once humans butchered animals, they faced the same practical question. What do you do with all the edible pieces that are too small or inconvenient to cook separately? One answer was sitting inside the animal itself. Intestines could be cleaned and turned into natural containers. Small pieces of meat and fat could be chopped, seasoned, packed inside, and then cooked or preserved. Nothing useful had to be wasted. By the ancient world, versions of sausage-like foods were already well established. In Mesopotamia, some of humanity's earliest surviving culinary texts show a sophisticated world of meat, spices, stews, and food preparation. They do not give us a neat birth certificate for the modern sausage, but they reveal something important. Thousands of years ago, cooks were already transforming animal products with techniques far more complex than simply roasting meat over a fire. Ancient Greek literature gives us a clearer glimpse. In Homer's Odyssey, written down around the late 8th or early 7th century BC, there is a striking comparison involving goat stomachs filled with fat and blood being turned over a fire. The image is recognizable even today. Animal casing, filling, heat. And then the sausage became entertainment. In the 5th century BC, the Athenian playwright Aristophanes wrote a comedy called The Knights. One of its central characters is a sausage seller. That detail only works as comedy because audiences already understood the occupation. Sausages were not some mysterious delicacy. They belonged to everyday urban life. But it was the Romans who left some of the most famous traces of the ancient sausage tradition. Roman cuisine made enthusiastic use of minced meat, herbs, pepper, wine, nuts, and other flavorings. A collection of Roman recipes, traditionally associated with the name Apicius, includes preparations for sausages and other stuffed meat dishes. Imagine a Roman kitchen, bronze utensils, smoke rising from a charcoal brazier, pepper being crushed in a mortar, meat chopped by hand, and cleaned intestine waiting to be filled. There were no electric grinders, no plastic packaging, no temperature-controlled production line. Everything depended on skill, salt, heat, and time. One sausage became particularly famous, the Lucanica, associated by Roman writers with Lucania in southern Italy. The name survived far beyond the Roman Empire and has relatives in later Mediterranean sausage traditions. That is one of the strange things about sausage history. Empires collapse, languages change, borders disappear, recipes keep traveling. After the Western Roman Empire fragmented, sausage did not disappear. If anything, the basic technology became even more useful. Medieval Europe was a world in which preserving food could determine whether a household ate well months after slaughter. Animals were often killed seasonally, particularly when keeping them alive through winter would consume valuable feed. That created an enormous quantity of meat at once. The solution was preservation. Some meat could be salted, some dried, some smoked, some cooked, and scraps, fat, blood, organs, and smaller cuts could be transformed into sausages and related preparations. The casing was not just packaging. It helped turn irregular pieces into a compact food that could be cooked, hung, smoked, transported, and portioned. And geography began shaping flavor. In colder regions, sausages could be dried or smoked under conditions that would be difficult to reproduce in hotter climates. Near major trade routes, expensive spices could enter recipes. In wine-producing regions, wine might become part of the mixture. Different animals, forests, grazing conditions, religions, and local tastes produced different traditions. There was never one European sausage. There were hundreds. In German-speaking lands, sausage culture became especially diverse. Cities and regions developed specialties that eventually became part of local identity. Nuremberg became famous for small bratwursts. Thüringen developed its own bratwurst tradition. Frankfurt became associated with sausages whose name would later travel far beyond Germany. The word bratwurst itself reflects an older German tradition of finely chopped meat combined into sausage, rather than simply meaning something cooked on a grill. Move south into Italy and the landscape changes again. Italian sausage traditions include fresh sausages, cooked products, and long-cured salumi. Although English speakers often use salami almost as a synonym for a particular kind of sausage, Italy developed an enormous family of regional preserved meats with different textures, spices, molds, curing methods, and meat ratios. The crucial transformation here is almost invisible. Microorganisms help make certain fermented sausages possible. For most of history, sausage makers did not understand microbiology in the modern scientific sense. But through repeated practice, they learned that controlling salt, moisture, temperature, airflow, and time could transform raw ingredients into foods that lasted much longer and developed entirely new flavors. A sausage hanging quietly in a cellar was actually undergoing a complicated biological and chemical transformation. Water was leaving, acidity could change, proteins and fats were changing. Microbes were competing. The result could be dramatically different from the fresh meat that entered the casing weeks or months earlier. Farther west, the Iberian Peninsula developed another distinctive family of sausages. Spanish chorizo became famous for a red ingredient that Europeans could not have used before Columbus crossed the Atlantic. Paprika. Peppers originated in the Americas. After European contact with the Americas beginning in the late 15th century, capsicum peppers spread through Europe and beyond. Eventually, varieties of dried red pepper became deeply embedded in Spanish and Portuguese cooking. Today, the red color of many chorizos seems timeless. It isn't. It is evidence of the Columbian exchange sitting inside a sausage casing. That single detail tells a much bigger story. Foods we think of as ancient national traditions are often historical collisions. Ingredients cross oceans, empires expand, trade routes shift, farmers adopt unfamiliar crops. Eventually, something foreign becomes so familiar that people cannot imagine the cuisine without it. Sausage traveled across the Atlantic too. European migrants brought their food traditions to North America, where recipes adapted to new ingredients, communities, and cities. German immigration would have an especially visible impact on American sausage culture. By the 19th century, German-speaking immigrants had established communities across the United States, bringing butcher traditions and sausages with them. Foods associated with German culture became increasingly common in American cities. Then something curious happened to the Frankfurt sausage. Its geography disappeared from its name. The term Frankfurter, linked to Frankfurt, became familiar in English. Wiener, meanwhile, refers to Vienna Wien in German. Different sausage traditions and names overlapped as they moved through languages and across borders. Eventually, Americans embraced another name, the hot dog. The precise story behind that term is messy, with popular legends often repeated more confidently than the evidence allows. But by the late 19th and early 20th centuries, sausages served in bread were becoming strongly associated with American street food. Amusement parks, baseball culture, and inexpensive urban eating. This was sausage undergoing another transformation. For ancient households, sausage had helped preserve valuable meat. For industrial cities, it became fast food. A worker did not need a plate, knife, or dining room. Put a hot sausage into a split roll, add mustard or another condiment, and the meal could be eaten while standing on a street corner. The casing had always made sausage portable. The bun made it even more portable. But industrialization was changing much more than how sausage was served. For centuries, sausage production had largely been the work of households and local butchers. The industrial age brought mechanized grinders, larger slaughterhouses, mass transportation, refrigeration, standardized production, and eventually enormous meat processing companies. Chicago became one of the great symbols of this new system. During the 19th century, railroads carried livestock toward the city and processed meat outward toward consumers. Huge packing operations could slaughter and process animals on a scale that would have been unimaginable to a medieval butcher. Sausage fit this system perfectly. It could transform meat and fat into a standardized product with predictable size, flavor, and price. But mass production also created anxiety. When consumers knew their local butcher, they could see who made their food. Industrial meat might travel from a distant factory through a supply chain the customer never saw. What exactly was inside? How clean was the factory? Who was watching? Those questions exploded into American public debate in the early 20th century. In 1906, Upton Sinclair published The Jungle, a novel centered on immigrant workers and the brutal conditions surrounding Chicago's meatpacking industry. Sinclair's political goal focused heavily on labor exploitation, but readers became horrified by descriptions associated with food production. Public outrage contributed to momentum for federal food and meat inspection reforms. That same year, the United States passed the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act. The sausage had entered the age of regulation, and by then, preservation itself was changing. Mechanical refrigeration gradually weakened one of sausage's original advantages. Meat no longer always needed to be heavily salted, smoked, dried, or fermented simply to survive storage. Yet sausage did not disappear. Instead, the reason for eating it changed. People wanted the flavor, they wanted the texture, they wanted the tradition, they wanted bratwurst at festivals, chorizo in family dishes, salami sliced onto bread, breakfast sausage in a frying pan, and hot dogs at baseball games. A technology created partly to preserve meat had become culture. Then the 20th century pushed sausage into mass consumer life. Supermarkets offered refrigerated packages. Factories produced enormous quantities with tightly controlled recipes. Synthetic and manufactured casings joined traditional animal casings. Food science made production increasingly predictable. Cold chains allowed fresh sausages to travel distances that earlier generations could never have imagined. At the same time, regional sausages became global products. Polish kielbasa could be sold far outside Poland. Italian-style salami appeared in supermarkets around the world. German bratwurst became international. Chorizo spread through multiple culinary cultures. The American hot dog became one of the most recognizable foods on Earth. Yet globalization did something strange. It made sausage more standardized and more diverse at exactly the same time. A factory could produce millions of nearly identical sausages. Meanwhile, a traditional butcher could preserve a recipe associated with one town, one family, or one region. Both products could sit only a few meters apart in the same supermarket. And the casing still tells the oldest part of the story. Traditional natural casings are usually made from carefully cleaned parts of animal intestines. Modern production also uses collagen, cellulose, and other casing technologies depending on the sausage and manufacturing process. But the fundamental architecture remains astonishingly familiar. Take meat, reduce it into smaller pieces, mix it with fat, salt, and flavorings. Put it into a tube. Then use heat, smoke, drying, fermentation, refrigeration, or some combination of them to turn it into something useful and delicious. Thousands of years of technology have changed almost everything around the sausage. The basic idea survived, and perhaps that is why the history of sausage is much bigger than the history of one food. It is the history of humans refusing to waste valuable calories. It is the history of preservation before refrigeration. It is the history of farmers slaughtering animals before winter, merchants carrying spices across continents, microbes quietly transforming meat in dark cellars, migrants carrying recipes across oceans, factory workers feeding industrial cities, and families keeping regional traditions alive. Even its flavors function like historical maps. Pepper points toward ancient trade. Paprika points toward the Americas and the Columbian Exchange. Smoking points toward preservation. Fermentation points toward knowledge developed long before anyone could see bacteria under a microscope. The hot dog points toward immigration and industrial urban life. And the endless regional varieties point toward something even older. Humans take the same problem and solve it differently depending on where they live. So the next time you see a sausage sizzling in a pan, hanging in a butcher shop, turning over a grill, or sitting inside a stadium bun, look at its shape. Because that simple shape has survived kingdoms, empires, migrations, industrial revolutions, refrigeration, factories, supermarkets, and modern food science. The sausage began as an ingenious answer to an ancient problem: how to make as much use as possible from an animal before valuable food was lost. Today we no longer need sausage for exactly the same reasons our ancestors did. We kept making it anyway, not because history failed to replace it, but because somewhere along the way, a survival technology became something much harder to replace: a tradition.